Hello, folks.
Hi, Pam.
Ivan is, I guess Maru is on paid time off this week, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. We'll wait for a couple of more minutes so all can join. Yeah, there
Hey,
he is.
everybody. Thanks for waiting for me. Looks like we're still getting maybe a couple folks joining. Think we should get started, Irfan?
Yep, I think we have enough attendance now.
Okay.
Why don't you start with the agenda item that you did put in?
Yeah, sure. So we found this week, and when I say we, I mean Ivan, Font, and Lindsay really spent most of the time on this. We found that the install latest YAML is using the latest tag for the Federation V2 image, which is the latest released version. And the YAML itself is actually only works with the canary tag due to the namespacing changes that we put in. So a few things that we thought should be discussed today. The first one is we think that there should be a CI flow that checks to ensure that install latest works with the version of the image that's built for a particular pull request, and also runs against master, so that we can ensure that that remains working. The second one, and actually before I go on to that one, I think that what we'll probably have to do for now is have like a single node version of that deploys Federation into a cluster probably that Prow gives us, and then uses that cluster both as the host for Federation and the target cluster, so that we can take one cluster, deploy Federation into it, use Federation to target the host cluster, and verify that as someone would deploy it, that Federation works. I say a single node version or a single cluster version of this because we don't have a good way yet with the testing infrastructure to get multiple clusters at the same time, as far as I understand. Any comments or thoughts people want to share on that before we move on to
So I have a question
domain?
on that, Paul.
Sure.
So you mentioned that we can probably use a Prow build where KTS cluster is provisioned to test out the last released version, right? Am I right about that?
Well, I think it probably varies. So there's two different things actually. Let's decompose it and be really specific. One, yes, we should make sure that that there is some stable way to use the latest released version of Federation that will work. And two, we should ensure that there is we should ensure that there's a way that you can deploy Federation as it's checked in to the master branch that works correctly.
Okay, let me simplify. Let me simply. Okay. I got. I mean, if I think like that, I'll get too many options. Let's simplify it a little bit. I remember that we had some discussion about this, and we did conclude that we will maintain one branch, and whatever is latest in Federation, we have to ensure that that works fine with some X version of KTS. Either it could be the latest KTS, or for example, the last released, say 1.11 KTS. Okay, so why don't we keep it simplified to that only? That means to say that our last release version of Federation was 0.0.1, it might not work today. But the latest that we have right now should work with a particular version of K8s, which probably is the latest release version of K8s, right? So if we find, in case somebody reports, one reason for us to release a new version might be that somebody reports that your older version, older release version 0.0.1 is not working.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I think that I'm thinking of something slightly different than what you're talking about, in the sense that that there should be a way that you install the latest released version, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there should also be something that makes sure that when you try to use master, that it works in the sense that when you try to deploy Federation using the instructions, that works correctly. So do you see my point, Irfan? That, like, in this case, we have instructions that use the install latest YAML, and that install latest YAML had changes for the pod spec to run Federation that were dependent on code changes that were in the image being used. And in this case, the install latest YAML was referring to a version of the image that didn't have the code changes because we haven't done a release yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in this case that we have a couple options for something tactical to fix this. One would be to use the canary image in install latest for now. We could also have an install canary YAML that is specifically designated as the place where we're going to keep the master branch working, right? We could also write a Helm chart to install Federation and publish those charts to a Helm repository and version the charts in the same way that we version Federation itself. So, for example, we could say that our next version is going to be 0.0.2. We could have a Helm chart that was specifically for 0.0.2 that we publish to a Helm chart repository. And when we make the changes for 0.0.3, publish it there and have these use the tagged versions. So tagged versions of the image, so that when you say, I want to install version 0.0.2 of Federation v2, that you get the right set of things to make it work.
Yeah, I got what you are saying, Paul. I am differing on only one thing. So either using Helm or some mechanism, for example, we are using install latest right now. That is deploying the latest released version of Federation for any user who wants to try it out. Okay. And one statement, I'm trying to repeat it again, which is we support the latest released version on a given K8s version. So that should work. If that's not working, then we have a problem.
Right.
But
so
the older ones that we have released, for example, 0.0.1 we have released, we found a problem right now because there is some mismatch in our install latest. We are not using the correct version which we should be using of the image which we have published or pushed, right? If we correct it here, that should be sufficient. I did not understand the usage of what you were pointing at, using another job to verify something. I didn't get to verify what.
So let me, with my understanding of what's in your head, let me reformulate the statement, and I think we can clear the mismatch. So in this particular case, install latest.yaml should not have been updated, right? Like, in the sense that if install latest.yaml is at this point going to be the way that you install the latest released version, then that should remain static until
New version is
release
released.
the version.
Yeah.
So what happened is that we made some changes that required changes to install latest.yaml, but we didn't update the image that YAML file is actually referring to. So I think what we could do instead is have something that's like install canary.yaml that is where we make changes that are going to roll into install latest.yaml during the next release, and have the instructions to, to try out Federation be in terms of install latest, so that you're using a released version. But for development flow, you probably just want Canary, and you might want Canary with your own version of the image, in which case you can.
Yeah, actually, the difference between that install latest, there's another script called install dot. There is another script which says install.asset, right?
Right.
Which can take the image name, which can take the image name as argument, which is for the developers. So that should be sufficient, no?
No, because parameterizing install latest.yaml with just the image doesn't account for the changes to the YAML file itself.
Okay.
So say that we release version X and we make a change after we release version X that changes what has to be in the installation YAML. We should have a place that is how you install the latest unreleased version in master. And when we do a release, we should roll those changes into install latest.yaml, I guess is what I'm proposing. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. Understood.
Okay. And in terms of the CI flow, I think that we should have a job that makes sure that install latest keeps working. So specifically, I think that we should have some kind of CI flow that exercises install latest.yaml with the latest release version, and make sure that like no breaking changes creep into that YAML that will break someone trying to use it to test drive Federation.
Okay. Understood.
Which is effectively what happened. If you tried to use install latest YAML, it'll break right now. Ivan, I don't think you've made a poll to fix it yet, right? We were going to see what came out of the working group today.
That's right. Yep. And potentially uncovered another issue, but that's another problem.
Okay.
Okay, so does that make more sense to folks now?
Just to me.
Okay. And then the final point here, I think, is should we release 0.0.2? I think that I think it's arguable that we should, since we've made a fair amount of changes since 0.0.1, and I wondered what people thought about that.
I think we're at a good point where we should release a new version, but we have to make sure that we can run against multiple clusters beyond just like what we're testing in integration, EDE, and CI. And that would be our benchmark for determining whether we're ready to release
Is it really running against multiple clusters, Ivan, or is it testing that the installation YAML works correctly, possibly with a single cluster?
It's both. I think the installation YAML working properly is definitely a first requirement, but it may uncover other issues just by going through like the example in the user guide. And if we can test against multiple clusters and verify it works, I think that's probably a good smoke test to make sure we're ready to release.
Yeah, my concern with making that a prerequisite to release O.O.2 is that I don't think we have any good options for automating a test like that at this point, which is why I was thinking that a test of Federation as deployed by install latest, ensuring that that worked correctly with a single cluster is probably sufficient, or at least sufficient as a next step in the absence of a ready-made way to test with multiple clusters from Prow.
Yeah, that I mean that's pretty similar to what we're doing in E2E. It's just that it would also test like the main entry point path, which I think would be good to do. But I guess the reason I'm saying this is we should verify at least manually. If we don't have an automated way, sure, that would be ideal, but we need to at least verify it manually because I think it can potentially uncover issues.
Right, and I think the key here is what you hit upon with exercising the main entry point. So running against something that is actually deployed in a cube cluster, right?
Right.
To me, that's the salient point, rather than the number of clusters that you're communicating with.
Yeah, I think so. It's just that there's still potentially another issue in master right now beyond just the install YAML. So I don't think we're ready to release a .2 yet.
Okay, understood. I see what you're saying. So I am saying that I think that a good next step would be an automated test with a single target cluster. And I think what you're saying is that modulo that, you believe that there may still be another issue that we need to ensure is not actually a bug before we release, right?
Right.
Okay.
And that it may not be caught even if we had this automated single cluster main entry point smoke test.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think that having a simple smoke test with a single cluster would let us shake out more issues than we can right now.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, if it's automated, great. But until then, we may want to consider doing a manual smoke test against at least 2 clusters or running through the user guide example. But as a first step, I think getting, an automated single cluster test with using the, exercising the main entry point would be a good goal for now.
So since you think there may be another issue, I'm kind of hearing that you're interested in doing this yourself to track down whether there's actually another bug.
It appears that there is another bug. It seems like somehow the namespaces aren't quite cooperating when there's 2 clusters in place. So the example is still failing even with the latest master.
Okay. All right. Tell you what, I don't want to turn the meeting on its head around that. Let's talk about that one offline. Here's my question to the group: if we have a high degree of confidence that the example application will work with multiple clusters, what do folks think about releasing an O.O.2?
Yeah, I think we should release.
O2. Yeah, it seems logical to me to go ahead and do that. We have done good number of updates post O.O.1 release also.
Yeah, Paul. I also think that before we release the O.O.2, maybe we should first add some new examples for the new features, such as the Federation DNS, Federation Ingress Controller. etc. Because I found that we add many new features, but we don't have enough examples for people to do some tests.
I think that's fair. Do folks want to talk through examples that we think would be helpful to add now, starting with like the DNS one, so we can get onto the same page about that? What do folks think?
Yeah, it seems like a very good suggestion. Like
Yeah.
it is anyways for some features, like examples and a little bit of documentation is overdue. So we can include that as a prerequisite also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we have new features like Federation DNS, Federation Ingress Controller, preference scheduling policy, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you think of the complete story, I think there's one PR still in progress in external DNS. So probably if that is merged, then we have a complete story. Otherwise, it could be like we have a types, but still we couldn't program the DNS records. So I think, yeah, maybe it should be done within a week, hopefully. I think we can, I'll initiate the documentation for those features. Yeah.
Great. I think that I can also have to do some tests for if the document is ready. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Gonga.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, one more point. Uh, Paul, I did not understand the need of a Prow cluster. Is it possible to run one more CI job that we are running
I think if
right now?
there's a message from Paul, is away for a minute.
Okay, anybody, I mean, if somebody else got that, my question is that, is it possible to run another Jenkins CI job against the same repo that we have, which could basically verify that install latest against a single cluster uh, using similar mechanism that we are using for E2E test right now?
I have to do something really quick. Give me 30 seconds. I'll be right back.
Sure. Probably Ivan might be able to.
Yeah, we can run another job. Certainly, we could just add it to the list in the Travis manifest, and we could easily run another job. I think Paul's suggestion to use Prow is he may be referring to Travis. I'm not sure if he's specifically referring to Prow or just some way of running a test job.
Hey, I was referring to Prow because it can give you a Kubernetes cluster without you having to worry about where that cluster comes from.
Okay.
Versus, if we wanted to try to fit this into the Travis flow, we would need to handle setting up the cluster ourselves, and Prow can just give you a cluster to use. So I'm open to whatever people want to do. That's totally fine. But like this is basically the value proposition of Prow, is that you get a cluster, you can exercise it however you want, which seems like what we need to do.
Okay.
So Ivan, are you going to take the action item on tracking down remaining issues with the install latest flow?
Yes, I will do that. But
Okay.
I still think we need to discuss what we want to do to resolve that. I'm not sure that I heard an agreement on what we wanted to do. It sounded like we want to maintain install latest to refer to the latest released version, which means not updating it, which means the user guide still works as long as we revert some of those changes that went in. And sounds like we also want a way to test master, possibly with a new install master.yaml, and have the most updated changes there that can be used, which probably won't work with the user guide, but we need to make that apparent by discussing that.
Yeah, I think that is kind of what we circled around, but I think it's good to be explicit about that. Does what Ivan described work for everybody? Like, do we think that's a sensible way to proceed here?
Yep. I agree with that.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. Like, why don't we try with Helm chart instead of this install scripts actually? So probably we have a separate location where we can keep incrementing the version. We have a change.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Shashi. Especially as we get into having any kind of webhook or anything that needs to serve TLS, we're going to want to have something more than just like a static YAML, because we'll need to mint certificates, right? And honestly, I think we're just like one feature or one code change away from needing that. So I personally think that's a sensible way to proceed. I think it will probably be a good tactical thing to do to get install latest working again. And also, as a tactical thing, introduce like an install canary or something. But yeah, I personally think it would be a good idea to start working on a Helm chart, which shouldn't really be that hard to do because we already have the YAMLs represented. Well, we just need to turn them into a chart and parameterize them in the required ways.
Yep, right. That's what I was thinking.
So are we comfortable then with like the tactical steps that we discussed here, with the next play after those tactical things are done, creating a Helm chart?
Yep, sounds good to me. Yep.
Yep, same. Shashi probably did some exploring around implementation.
Yeah, I haven't given a complete detail, but I just need to start. That was one of our item actually in my list.
Okay, I'm recording this in the notes. If folks want to verify that what they think or what I'm writing down matches what we discussed.
Yes, it does.
If we want to create a Helm chart to deploy, sorry, Paul, do you mean that we want to create a Helm chart to install Federation controller?
That's
right. Exactly. Yep. A Helm chart that deploys Federation v2 into host cluster for Federation.
Where exactly would it be maintained? Like, is it possible to get that into the charts repo that KFS has, or we have to maintain it separately?
Ideally, we should put it into charts repo. If we start maintaining in our own repo, maybe it will also be prone to changes. So I think that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So what we've done in Service Catalog is that the Helm chart is developed in the Service Catalog repo and published to a chart repository when Service Catalog is released.
Yeah, that's
okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Istio is also doing same way, and we maintain the Helm chart in Istio source code, and we don't put it into the Kubernetes Helm chart. because in there we don't have maintainers and it's difficult to have those PRs to got merged.
Yep.
So does the Helm chart that we want to create for Federation only want to focus on master, or also want to have it to deploy the Federation 0.1 and the coming 0.2?
I think we should start with 001, but if it takes too much, maybe we can just move on to 002. If we can revert 001 and then make that as a Helm chart, the first version of Helm chart, that should be good.
Yeah, I think that should be very doable. It should be pretty easy to translate from an install latest.yaml that works with 001 into Helm chart.
Yeah, but
Yep.
because the 001 already been released, so where shall we host the Helm chart for this version?
I mean, okay. In terms of the commit history, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Okay, that's a little tricky. Maybe we can just add an initial version of Helm chart in our repo, which works for 001, revert the changes in install latest, and then publish that to repo, chart repo. And from then onwards, we can maintain our running versions in our repo and then publish whenever we release.
Oh, okay. I see. So you mean that we can host release the charts into the Kubernetes Helm chart repo and maintain the development Helm chart in Federation v2 repo?
Yep, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I think we have consensus on that. So
yeah. So because we have some items here, so do we need to open some issues in GitHub to trace those tasks?
Yes, I think that would be good.
Yeah, I will open issues after this meeting with like the next steps that we arrived on.
Yeah, Paul, I think that we should also open an issue in Kubernetes Helm charts repo to say that we want to create a chart to host the Federation 0.1 release.
Yeah, we can do that once we have the chart, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just hoping that it is easy to get public charts merged into the charts repo.
I think that maybe we can add owner files into the subchart so that we will have permissions to get merged, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll see to it when it
yeah
comes.
I think I can create the 0.1 Helm chart into Helm chart repo because I have been working for some Helm charts in previous days. I think I can have this one.
Okay, are we talked through this and ready to talk about status?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So Lindsay Tulik at Red Hat has done some prototyping work to add a status resource that collects a couple fields on federated replica set. And she doesn't have a poll ready yet to go to Federation v2, but there is a poll to my fork that I'm happy to share. One sec while I locate the link.
Hello.
Okay, I'm dropping the link into the chat now.
Okay.
So just to be really crisp, this pull request adds a new resource called Federated Replica Set Status, whose spec is essentially empty, and whose status contains a list of the statuses for the federated replica set that is deployed in each target cluster. So let me find a pointer into this pull request because it's pretty big. Let's see here. All right, I'm dropping a link into the chat. Now, Lindsay did some exploration of this concept in terms of just adding this federated replica set status as a special case. This pull request doesn't work yet. We have been fighting for the last couple days the issues that we've actually just talked through. So Lindsay hasn't had a good working baseline to use, but now that we have this identified, I think she's probably about one work session away from having something working. Now, with all that said, this experience has raised some interesting questions. So the fields of replica set status that this pull request is supposed to work with right now are just two fields. There's replicas and ready replicas. And what Lindsay had to do in the sync controller was basically add this as a special case. And so, one sec, I'll provide a link to the sync controller changes. So if you take a look at what the changes she had to make to the sync controller were, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that this is a special case, and it required, at this prototyping stage, required some custom code. I think one question that I am asking myself is what it would take to make a reusable federated status facility, so that we might be able to treat status as something that has parity with the other things about federated type config, like the overrides resource, the placement resource, and as a sibling to that might have a status resource that we could have a controller that knew how to transform arbitrary statuses into a list so that we didn't have to add special code for each type that we wanted to add support for. I wonder if anybody's thought about that yet, like Irfan and Shashi, have you guys thought about this yet?
Yeah, this is
the first thing
we discussed. Actually, yeah, federated status has two parts. One which is useful for a user, and another which could be used by other controllers without going through all the member cluster, like monitoring the member cluster resources. So I think, yeah, the later part which you suggested, the generic solution of handling the status. So I'm wondering how does the approach of status into the federated type config, like the status could be similar to template, just wrap around the types status into there as a list.
Yeah.
I think that should work, right?
That was kind of the direction my thinking was going into, with the question in my mind of exactly what it would take to have a generic facility that did that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty doable. I think that would be very useful for all the controllers who want to know the status of the resource in those clusters. And then maybe there could be some specialized status, like we want to give consolidated like status to the user, maybe we could instead of like cluster 1, cluster 2 as a separate status, maybe we could give a consolidated view by some other controller or some other API types.
Yeah, so actually I want to make sure that I'm not making an assumption. So when you talked about like the difference between a status that's useful to a user and a status that's useful to other controllers, it sounds to me like the status for other controllers is a list, and the status that's usable for users is like a projection, a superposition of all the statuses in that list. Is that accurate?
We can debate on that actually. So yeah, like if you want to maintain a similar compatibility with for the resource in Kubernetes, okay, so it makes sense like to give a consolidated view to the user. But if we are okay to make that distinction, like federated types will be a list, then I think it should be the same status should hold good.
Yeah. So it does sound to me like when you refer to like the status that's useful to the user, you're thinking like an aggregated status, right?
Right.
You
Right.
have to pick through a list of the status in each cluster.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I originally had thought about those two very different types of status information as, you know, maybe you want one but not the other. But now I'm sitting here looking at the changes that we had to make to the sync controller, and I'm thinking to myself that like ultimately there's going to be some controller that has all this information or all the information necessary to do like the list flavor of status, which is also all the necessary information to do the aggregated flavor of status. And I'm kind of wondering that whether a generic facility should just be able to do them both in a single status resource.
Let me elaborate our thought a little more. So
Sure.
The generic one, which I think Shashi referred to as a list of statuses, which is nothing but the same status type. For example, status of replica set in K8s. So it will be replica set status and a list of that in either a separate API, which seems like an empty pattern to me because for that API the spec is empty, or embedded into the status of one of the basic types that we have defined. For example, we have defined the template. So in that type, this is the generic status which will reflect for a given federated template. For example, a federated replica set has a status which the sync controller itself updates as a list. The specialized or aggregated view is up to a user-defined type or a high-level controller to present to the user. So it need not be. It need not be the prerequisite for the federation as of now.
Let me make sure that I heard you right, Irfan. It sounds like you're proposing that the list flavor of status could potentially just live on be the status of the template.
Yes.
And that if you wanted a user-facing view, you can build another resource to do that wherever you want.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm also proposing that this can be considered as part of the lower level building blocks that we did to brainstorm earlier. So we have 3 fields or 3 resources, and there is a sync reconciler, which basically does all this reconciliation to the federated clusters. Now this is like some reconciliation back from the federated clusters also. So this portion of code which updates this also is part of the sync controller in some generic fashion.
Okay, yeah, Let me think about that, but that
Yeah.
seems agreeable to me at first blush. I'm curious to know what others think.
I mean, we can obviously discuss a little more about this and
Yeah.
think about alternatives, but this is generally like what we did talk about earlier. Like I and Shashi had a little brainstorming on this, and we did arrive at this.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably a sensible direction to proceed in. At first glance, are in terms of like priority for Huawei, are you all interested in working on this like immediately?
Actually, as far as Huawei is considered, we think this is a necessary building block for us. So
Right.
this can be our next priority item.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I am liking the sound of this. Like, as you know, my subjective opinion, I think what you described makes sense to me in terms of this being like a fairly fundamental building block and a sibling to the other fundamental building blocks.
Yep. So we can probably
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
We can probably open an issue for this and maybe describe a little bit of what we have in mind in that issue, and then further get comments or anti-comments over there.
Sounds great. So, Irfan or Shashi, can I put you down as taking the action item to do that?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, I see you're taking notes, Irfan.
Yeah, I'll update the action item also against this. And yeah, I'll need a little bit time to update these notes further.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if there is something else that we want to talk, we can talk now. There is nothing else on today's agenda apart from these two.
Yeah, I was about to ask if there were other topics folks wanted to discuss.
Okay, it seems that's it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Yep. See you next week. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.